Good afternoon. My name is Joe Goldberg, and I'm the Cloud Practice Manager here at CCSI. Today, Matt Pascucci, our Security Practice Manager, will be talking about threat models. And welcome to our Cybersecurity Framework 103 presentation. Just a quick bit about CCSI. We've been in business for 40 years. We provide all kinds of services like infrastructure, cloud services, cybersecurity, and NOC and SOC services. I will now turn it over to Mr. Matt Pascucci, who will entertain you with the Cybersecurity Framework 103.
Thanks, Joe. So see here, I am going to get control here and push this over to the next one here. So we have Joe. Joe is the handsome one on top there. He was just speaking about what we were doing here as a company, what we've been doing. And, you know, we have been building out these two practices over the past couple of years. He's very responsible for the cloud side of things, and I'm responsible for the cyber related things. And when we peanut butter and jelly it together, we come out with some services that are more cloud security centric. So those are things we've been doing over the past, I would say the past 4 or 5 years. And, you know, a lot of times when we do this, we speak quite a bit about threat modeling, what they are, you know, how do we use them, and the purpose of being able to go out there and apply these models towards protecting ourselves. So from CCSI's business, we do infrastructure, data center, third-party maintenance, we do cloud, we do cybersecurity and physical security. So we kind of wrap around the physical world into how we can do this from a cyber perspective. And then we have our NOC and SOC, which is in Long Island and New York, and how we take that and monitor 24/7. So all these areas that we have here, these 5 little tenets of business that we have, we wrap them around with our monitoring. We have a cloud or security-centric focus on all of them, so that we're able to go out there and really give our clients the best benefit for everything that they're doing, everything that they might be looking for, so that there's someone constantly that has their back. I said we're 24/7, so we have someone that's constantly looking, monitoring, and alerting. Our team of analysts that we have here are all SANS certified. They've taken the courses. They've been through the rigor to make these positions something that is a center point. It's kind of one of the crown jewels of our business is not really the services, but the people that are doing the services. So we utilize some interesting technology, but it's really the people in the background that are trained in how to use that, trained in understanding these threat models, because you can have the greatest technology in the world, but if you don't have the models with the education of the analysts that are using them, it doesn't really work out as well. So that's kind of what we want to focus on today a little bit, just on what these models are, the common ones. We're going to talk about 2 or 3 of them, and well, let's get started. So from an adversarial standpoint, when we're looking at threat modeling, it comes down to knowing your enemy. Everyone knows the Sun Tzu, you know, his books that he's written, and he has a great statement in one of them in his book. It says, if you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. So essentially what he's talking about is if you understand your environment and you understand who your attacker is and how they're going to attack, you can really help with detecting alerts as they come in. You can fight the battle better because you kind of have both sides that are going on here right now. So with that being said, we take these adversarial threat models, we use them because we're trying to learn our enemy. We're trying to learn what they're doing and who they are. And throughout this presentation, we're going to go over the cyber kill chain, we're going to go over MITRE, and we're going to go over the diamond model. These are 3 different models that are used commonly. Some of them are used in conjunction and supplementing each other. So how they work together, how they kind of become that blueprint. So a lot of times we're going to be sitting here, we're going to be looking at these frameworks as a blueprint to kind of prioritize detections as they come in. So if you see something come in from the framework, the MITRE framework, you understand what those tactics are, then you can probably understand what the techniques that they're doing, and then even possibly the type of attacker that is doing it. So those are very, very, very helpful for you to get going, as well as when you go through the cyber kill chain that Lockheed Martin made. You can understand if you see this attack occurring, what their goals are, where they are within that cyber kill chain, that you need to go stop them, and have an understanding of potentially how far the attackers have progressed and where they are in their kind of roadmap of attack. But these frameworks are commonly used for evaluating your defenses, so you can use them as blue team, red team. If you're a red teamer, you kind of know, hey, these are the areas I have to do. Here's some common tactics and techniques I can use. Here's the kill chain. Here's how I'm going to do things, and I need to go out there and do from the recon perspective and weaponize anything that I'm using, delivery, exploitation, installation. Like you're pushing them out and you're following the patterns that attackers are using today so that they can continue moving forward. So from that standpoint, that's more of the red team offensive side of things. You use the same exact part from the blue team, so you can kind of understand where you are within that pattern and where your attackers are and what you have to do. So this is really understanding their behavior and what they're likely to do next. That's huge. So if you know your enemy, you know yourself, you can understand what the attackers are going to do next, you have a better possibility to stop them. So we always hear all the time that attackers only have to win once, and we're getting attacked thousands of times, but they just got to win once. So we want to take these models and we want to spin this on them. We want to say that the attacker only needs to slip up once, right? If they slip up once, then we got them. So these are how we're trying to take these models, these mindsets of, we're getting attacked thousands of times. The volume of attack is so hard sometimes to focus on, which is why attackers slip in once, because they're throwing thousands of attacks at you and they just got to win once and they win the battle. We want to take that huge amount of focus of these massive volumes of attacks, and we want to say, based off these models, if we see them slip up once, we got them. So we need to turn the tables on them. So we need to prioritize these detections based off the techniques that we're talking about here. And the attackers are going to be constantly coming, and they're going to be constantly changing their tactics. So the MITRE framework that we're going to go over in a few minutes, that is constantly in flux. It is, there's tactics in there. Last year there was 11, now there's 12, right? So it's a community-based thing. It's growing, and it's great. It's great to have that because you no longer just have to sit there at the seat of your pants anymore, just kind of hoping and saying, well, I haven't seen this before, where you now have additional models and tactics and techniques and procedures that you have seen in the past based off of this modeling. These are important because the telemetry that you're getting from them to detect really is dependent on how you're going to react afterwards. So if you detect something within the kill chain, if you detect something within the MITRE framework, it's going to determine your reaction based off where they are and the tactics that they're using. So that's really where we get more of this prioritization, this focus, and what we were calling a blueprint before on where to start. So if you understand these things and you understand your attacker and you understand how to react to detecting them inside these frameworks, it gives you the best chance of winning. So we want to limit that. We want to limit the dwell time that these guys get in there because eventually it's going to happen. It's just always there. So when we do this, we want to say, you know what, we're not sitting here to say we're defending. Like these threat chains here are making the assumption that you're breached. They're making the assumption that something has slipped by, right? But we want to decrease the ability for us to allow them to move on, and we want to detect them quicker. So if they slip by once, we need to make sure that once they slip up in any way, we got them. So think of that too as we're talking about these threat models right now, is that these models are based off of somebody is doing something bad to you, and most likely, depending on where they are in that kill chain, they are actively either attempting to attack you, either pre-attack, or they are already there and they're already in your environment. So we have to really determine where they are within those stages. So the first one that we're going to speak about today, is MITRE. So MITRE is great. Everyone has known MITRE, whether you realize it or not, but MITRE has, because they do other things besides the attack kill chain here. So they were developed in 2013. They're a non-for-profit. The attack framework here stands for exactly what's there. Adversarial, tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. So they take these things that they have seen throughout the community, and they consistently put them into this framework. This framework consists of tactics as a top level, techniques as a lower level inside each of the tactics, and then below that, they have procedures based off of the malware that's used for them and potentially even other groups. But in addition to this, the behaviors, we want to know, what groups have been wanting to go out there, how are they classifying these attacks, and they really take this and you use these things, especially for MITRE, you use it from a real-time activity standpoint. So that's not something being like, oh yeah, when that happens, it's more this was detected, here's what to do. It's a very much point in time when you're using these MITRE tactics and techniques. So this occurred, here's what we're doing about it, and then since this occurred, it's a possibility that they have to go back within the attack framework to do other things, which we'll bring up, or here's the direction that based off of this tactic, they're probably going to be doing X, Y, and Z. So the mission really for MITRE is to solve problems that make the world safer. That's their entire mission. In the past, and I said they've done work with, bank fraud. They've done, counterterrorism. Everyone knows the CVEs. You see the CVEs. They're the ones who manage and help maintain that. So that's what I'm saying. You might not have known who they were, but you've seen their work in the past. So they manage that. They maintain the vulnerability management CVE, and now they take this framework and they're building off of it. So MITRE's great, really cool. As I said, the attack framework, stands for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. But within that, they have three matrices. So the three is pre-attack, enterprise, and mobile. The one we're going to focus on more today is enterprise, because that's the one when people say, oh, we're using the attack framework, they normally mean the enterprise one. So we're going to really speak about that one in more detail. But this all started about 6-7 years ago. It's been great. It improves the post-compromise, right? So we said before, this is not something from MITRE. This is not like, oh, we see recon. This is more of you have been compromised, and you're trying to get a better understanding of how the attackers get in and how to use this framework to identify those holes that you can go use in your playbooks and your incident response plans and all that kind of stuff. But there's 12 tactics that are currently there. We'll get into those a little bit more. And that's in the enterprise one, I'm sorry. The pre-attack really goes into how they're doing the recon, how they're going out there, gathering information, building personas on people. That's really the recon and weaponization phase if we're talking kill chain, which we'll get to. But the attack phase with enterprise is really going over how do they get initial access, their execution, how are they staying in the network, how are they discovering things afterwards, how are they moving within back and forth, pivoting east from west, collecting and exfiltrating data, and then having a foothold of a command and control, which is going to make a large impact to your organization. So that's what the enterprise framework does. That's the one we're going to focus on. It's usually the one that people speak to. The pre-attack really goes into a little bit more of, how are they in there before they stage this? What are they doing? What are attackers doing before they actually do the attack? Like all the preparation, because if you can catch them in the preparation, in their recon, and they're developing the tools and, staging, tools that sometimes we catch people that are staging tools outside your environment and they're getting ready. There's chatter all over the internet or certain forums. And if you can catch them in that pre-attack area, that's a great early warning system. The bells are ringing, the red flags are up. You can really get ready for the attack, which is really the attack for enterprise. But this is heavily guided towards you've already been attacked, you've already, for the enterprise, you've already had a compromise. It's post-breach, it's post-incident, right? So from this standpoint, it's heavily based off the inside of your network, internal network. And when we come down to it, it's not if, right, but when. But once we know what they're likely to do in your network, we can use this so attackers, once they slip up, we got them. And I want to just keep bringing that up there because there's so many times people have just said was like, well, attackers only need one shot to win. And it's like, well, they also only need one shot to lose, right? So once they get in there and they win, they have one shot to slip up. So the framework are broken down into tactics, they're broken into techniques, and they're broken into procedures. So the tactics that we'll get to in a second are pretty much the high level. What are the general areas that these attackers are looking to do? What are they generally looking to do? So one, initial access, right? That's a tactic. How are they getting in? How are they doing execution? That's another tactic. The techniques off of that are more of, from initial access standpoint, if you're getting in there, what technique did you use? Maybe it was a watering hole technique, stuff like that, right? So those are broken down within the framework. And as we go through this a little bit more, we see here's the pre-attack we were just talking about, and the attack for enterprise. There are multiple phases that we break this down to. You'll see in the top here, this is more or less a version of the kill chain from Lockheed Martin. There's multiple different versions of it. We're going to use the Lockheed one in a minute because that's the most famous. That's what all the other ones are based off of. But this is kind of how it's kind of breaking down the MITRE world into their matrices. They also have here, we have pre-attack and we have attack, but there's one for mobile. So it's specifically generated towards how attackers are going after mobile devices, which is just, when you think of mobile, you think of it's a completely different world half the time. It's similar, but it's turned it on its head. So we're going over here, pre-attack and attack for enterprise. So understanding here, we hit here the phases: priority of definition, targeted selection, information gathering. That's them going out there, understanding before I go out and do a phishing attack, who is the company, who are the people, technically what do they do, let's guide these things there, let's figure out their weaknesses. You get the adversary OPSEC part, which is very cool. So how are they using security? So these guys are building out tools. They're going to be building out infrastructure. So if you can determine from this MITRE framework, if you can determine early on when their infrastructure is being made, when they're getting out there, what they're using, you can prepare yourself from an intelligence standpoint using MITRE pre-attack that this is coming, and then you have the understanding of how it's happening. So that's one of the things from pre-attack, what they're doing from the building, the testing, and staging their capabilities, because the tools have to be made, they have to be tested. And we'll talk a little bit later on when we go on the diamond model about a particular use case that we're going to use called Sandworm, on how these attackers were using building, testing, and staging these capabilities, and how America is now preparing based off of seeing how they've done, based off that adversary. So that's an early view of how pre-attack maps towards the kill chain. Then you have the attack, because now the attack has been delivered, and they're looking to exploit, control, execute, and maintain, because they're in your network now. And that always is initial access. Like, what did they do? How did they get persistence in there? Do they have credentials? What are they doing from a discovery standpoint? Once you find out these things, once the attacker is able to slip up just once, you can find that tactic, and then below that there's techniques, and then below that there's procedures. So it's a very hierarchical, so you can bring things down a notch, and every time you bring it down, it kind of unfolds, and there's even more information, and then you gather it and it unfolds. But as it's unfolding, it's very focused. So as you have maybe a collection or a lateral movement, it's like, okay, we've detected them in a lateral movement part from a tactic. We're now going to bring that down, and we need to understand exactly what techniques they could be using. And then when you find out what technique they're using, then there's the potential to say, okay, they're doing lateral movement. Okay, we found out someone was moving from our tools. Then we determined that there was some network traffic. Now we're in network traffic. What are they doing? Maybe they're using RDP. They're living off the LAN. They're doing some type of malware that's collecting and decrypting information, so that as they're moving, they're gathering more insight. So you can really then focus in that one area. But as soon as the tactic is triggered, you build your matrix of how you're going to go out there and determine where these attackers are. And that's very important. So those, once again, this is another high level over here. So it's a constantly growing reference for adversary behavior. And the link down here, attack.mitre.org, tactics/enterprise. Go there. They break it down everywhere. It's a great little link. It really takes these 12 tactics. It breaks them down. You can click on each tactic. It unfolds, and it has the 254 techniques that are underneath each one. And underneath each of those techniques, there's a procedure section on possible procedures that they've seen in the past. And we've seen stuff like that as well. So this really helps with this top level framework, and it's worked its way down. It's community based and driven, so it's constantly being updated. So this is non-for-profit, so these guys are out there and they're doing this to help the greater good, and they're pulling things in, they're right into the framework. And then what's going on is a lot of technology companies, a lot of vendors in the security space, they're adding those into their tools, and they're mapping them so that you have that ability to get those new tactics and techniques inside your tool. And we'll go over that a little bit too and how we kind of do things from a CCSI perspective. But this is great to understand your adversary, understand your weaknesses, and what you're aware of and the actions that might be seen during these intrusions. So once again, it's a start to finish. You can determine the coverage of what your capabilities are. So you might be going through certain things and something's found or there's a discovery and you realize you just don't know what to do next, or you don't have the tools or the education, and that's a gap. And those are gaps need to be filled and need to be worked on. So this really helps with understanding weakness of yourself from an organizational standpoint, based off of what the attackers are capable of accomplishing. So as we spoke in the past webinars on 102, 101 and 102 is building your program and your frameworks, particularly so that you understand where you are and where your gaps are. This is now taking it down even lower of a level of, now that you've determined your gaps, what techniques are you actually doing? What controls might you be missing? And you tie everything together that way. So this is very much identifying the commonalities, right, of each one of these attackers that are going there, the tradecraft that they're using, as well as the distinguishing characteristics of these particular attackers, of these techniques, of these tactics. So sometimes you might find a group and they are absolutely just, and we're going to give an example right now. So like they do one thing, who it is, right? Here, if you look at the top here, we have these tactics right here. Like if you can see, I put the thing in the middle, so just to kind of give MITRE even more of a some face time on this presentation. But the initial access, see there's 10, that's the tactic. Underneath those you see techniques. So initial access, that's the first tactic, and then they have a drive-by compromise. So if we're going to go look at that one right off the bat, we see from that tactic, you found out there was something there. There was drive-by compromise, which is it's a technique that's being used. They understand how it's used. Then you go down even further by clicking and going through a lot of the MITRE attack framework that they have offered that you can download or have on their site. You might look at something from a procedural standpoint, and they give an example of the Lazarus group, which is an attacker group. What do they do from an initial access tactic? Well, they go out there and they make websites for watering holes. And this is an example they use. Once they have that on there, they go out there and they put malware on it. And then they say, here's the normal malware that this group uses. Here's the commonality of the adversaries and their capabilities. So these are the techniques that they're going out there to kind of perform this layer. So when you determine that and you say, and you can see these things, you can catch them within that initial access layer, down to the drive-by compromise technique layer, and then even going underneath it, the procedures of these are particular groups that have done this in the past. Here's how they've done it, even to the point of here's malware that they've used in the past to have accomplished it. Doesn't mean that they can't go make new ones. Doesn't mean that it's not a new group. But it's just giving you those procedures of how other groups have used it in the past. That's what you want to get involved with, because unless it's a 0-day, unless it's a brand new attack, you're having a lot of people repeat attacks. You're having a lot of copycats, and it allows you to get that better adversarial mindset and framework in your mind to say, this is probably what's occurring. And once you can kind of build that out, which we'll get with the diamond model a little bit, is you can now start detecting even better, because you're starting to put the pieces together and understanding what is the who, what, why, when of this attack. So this is MITRE. This is, go down to their website. It's freaking great. They have all this broken down to. This is just a high-level screenshot of it. Everything is broken down. You can use this in your programs. You can use this within your environment. We use it at CCSI when we go through our threat modeling for our SOC. So these are things that we utilize here. So you'll get, as we get through the next one here and we go through the cyber kill chain, you might see privilege escalation here, which is one of the tactics in MITRE. It might go back again. You might have privilege escalation, which goes down to the technique of access token manipulation, and it might take that and go back towards the execution phase and start doing more payload uploads and then going back to persistence. It doesn't mean that once you hit one of these tactics that you don't do the ones before it. This could be a cyclical cycle that's going on constantly, and not all of them have to be done. You can go from initial access, where you gain access to something, directly to privilege escalation because you got an account, which goes potentially directly to exfiltration because you're on a box already that had that data, and you're good. So these are not do X, Y, Z follow this roadmap. These are tactics and what's occurring from them and the potential for the next level that's going to kind of happen, right? It doesn't mean that's the way it goes, and it doesn't mean that you won't go back 2 levels and then back up 1. These are just ways that they're using to compromise and to kind of gain a foothold within your organization. And then by being able to see each one of these tactics, it gives you a better idea of where to focus your remediation. So that I want to make sure that's kind of clear. It doesn't mean that once you hit one of these tactics that you're getting ready for the next one or you're not going back in time. These are just areas that we'll see because we need to tie this to the kill chain. The kill chain is a little bit more binary, and the way that it works, where you hit one, normally the next one comes in line, the next one comes in line. This, from the MITRE standpoint, is these things have to get done in order for them to fulfill their mission, and sometimes that mission means they're doing one tactic multiple times and another tactic not at all. But it allows you to get a better understanding of who, what, when, and why throughout using these techniques and tactics and procedures. So the next one that we'll be kind of just taking a quick peek at, each one of these, I mean, there's been presentations done on MITRE just based off of one tactic at a time. These are just high-level things. We're kind of blown through this quick, so if there's questions afterwards, feel free to put them in the comment box. But these are just overviews for you guys to get in there, get a little bit deeper, get a better understanding. But Lockheed Martin came out with the cyber kill chain. This is trademark to them. This is their baby. Everywhere you go, you see someone else use it. They always got to mention, Lockheed Martin made this. We're just making sure that's there. If they ever watch this, I said it. It's there. So from that standpoint, they've done a great job. Lockheed Martin was always a defense contractor, so a lot of things they built with these kill chains were built from a military perspective first, and they've taken this kill chain that they developed and they've made it more towards the cyber world. Okay, so the medium now is cyber, where in the past it was more physical, kinetic type of how are we going to defeat an enemy. But it focuses, heavily on the perimeter. It doesn't get crazy into the web app, but there are other models that get out there. There are alternatives to this. Gartner has their own now. Everyone's making their own. There's a new, they have 7 steps. There's a new one that has 8 steps. I'm just starting and staying here with the Lockheed Martin one just because they were the one who kind of came out with this, and then to have these offshoots afterwards. So we're going to start with the actual one that created it first. But very heavily from the physical world. There are 7 steps, like we just said. But when you understand the chain, it allows you to defend against these guys, the adversaries, because it helps you identify where they're going to go next. Like as we're dealing with MITRE, we're very heavily, here this happened, here's the techniques they're using, let's defend against that. When you get this involved with the kill chain, where it's a sequential way of going, you can really help with getting back and saying, okay, this is kind of where they are within their life cycle of attack, which potentially means they've done the ones behind it, and now they're looking to do the ones in front of it. So the chain is important. Each stage of this chain is a way for you to both detect the attacker and react to them. So the goal is to break the chain. And I know a lot of times that's very confusing for people is, they see this as the kill chain. The kill chain is the attacker. They are chaining those things up to pretty much kill. That's what they're doing. They're getting things going there. You, as the defender, have to break that chain. So a lot of times, when I've spoken to people in the past, they weren't sure what that meant by kill chain, like whose kill chain was it? Was the attacker's kill chain? Was it the defender's? The kill chain is what the attackers are doing to integrate and to chain together aspects and phases of their attack in order to be successful. Your job is to break that chain, because once the chain is broken, it makes it much more difficult for attackers to succeed. So our job, and always think of it that way, is to break the chain. We have to break the chain. Once we break the chain, we disrupt. And that's kind of what we're looking to do to utilize these adversarial models. So there are 7 steps within the kill chain. I literally just took this right off of Lockheed Martin's site because there was no better way to describe it instead of just taking the image that they made for everybody. So this is fantastic. So the first one's always recon, then weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and actions on objectives. So all of these normally happen with reconnaissance. If you have an an advanced attacker, they're going to be doing recon on your organization. This gets back to the MITRE one where we have pre-attack, kind of where they fit into this. So they're harvesting email addresses, they're going through LinkedIn, they're using OSINT, they're doing any type of calls to your call center. They're getting a better idea of who their victims are so that they can use those towards the next phase. So they gather all that intelligence and then they start their weaponization phase. So that really means understanding what they're going to do, how they're going to go and take some type of data or some type of exploit in some way and weaponize it. So from that, this could be phishing, right? They're getting ready, they have a payload, they've learned about your organization, and now they're sending over an email address, sending over an email with an attachment or a link or something that is going to be juicy for that particular organization or person to go click on. And that's now you're taking more of that weaponization part of it where they might have a phishing page stood up. That's part of their weaponizing. They're going to go out there and make some type of malware, whatever. It's going to deliver a payload that's going to do nasty things. That's their phase, right? The next phase is the delivery of it. How are they delivering it? Is it going to be via email with phishing? Is it going to be USB? Are they going to put something on a USB and leave it at your doorstep? What are they doing to deliver that payload to you? Some of these times, some things might even skip those two phases where you're skipping 2 and 3. You're going right from recon to exploitation, where you've now done recon and you realize that there's a gaping hole outside on their perimeter, or they're vulnerable to SQL injection. And now you go there and you say, based off of that, I'm going back to delivery, and we're going to start making up a custom SQL injection attack that's going to go out there and it's going to pull data, and they're going to go back and forth. So these things all slowly progress their way up towards the very end. So now after you've gotten more of that code on the victim systems, whether it be malware, SQL injection, what have you, you've now on their environment, you're doing something, and you have the malware or the code or the control, which now starts going into from 5 to 6 of the victim's systems. So what we look to do here is, after they've been exploited, we've now done some type of installation, and the installation phase is getting less and less today. I shouldn't say less and less. There's other options today where it's no longer we're dropping malware on there and we're controlling it. It could be an exploitation that goes directly to privilege escalation, which now allows you to have control over those systems where you're not installing anything right yet. You're really just using the tools that they have already in place, living off the land, where it's going to be much harder for any type of detection, and you're going to start moving and pivoting laterally. And that's where we start seeing things, once again, going backwards, where the exploitation installation phase, how far they've progressed, and you start combining that towards the MITRE tactics and techniques, where now they have the exploitation of these techniques, and you have them, and you're going down there, and what techniques did they use? Here's what they used, okay, and then you're combining these two together, where you're combining more or less the kill chain here as how long, and you're gonna you start the cyber clock ticking at that point. Where do you start moving? And based off of where they are within that kill chain, you can start pulling those tactics in to help you kind of diminish this a little bit, to keep the clock running. But the command and control phase comes out, where they are now able to command and control access back. So they have their C2 access back to the infrastructure that they've built. So that's one of the things that you want to always be able to find out, because that's also part of their recon phase. Part of their pre-attack phase is building that infrastructure. So the command and control is now being used and it's going back, right? And then once that is all set up, now they have complete hands-on keyboards, which is what Lockheed Martin calls it, and they can just control what they need to control. The exploitation doesn't have to happen anymore. The delivery is done. So a lot of these things are one-time shots, where the weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, you're in there, and now you set up the command and control. You might have multiple different ways of communicating back, and now you've gained your foothold and you have your access, and now you're going to have the intruder kind of accomplish what they're doing. And that is heavily now where you're going to be using MITRE. What are they doing? How are they doing it? How can we stop them? While this is occurring, we like to have someone call, hitting the cyber clock. So the cyber clock is on the attacker timeline, the responder timeline. So there, I put 4. These are all kind of consolidated. There's more than 4 little phases, but once the attacker's there, there's an active attack, your dwell time starts. we want to diminish the dwell time. And by diminishing dwell time, we can really assist with having that mean time to respond and detect kind of just decrease. That's really what we want to do. That's what our SOC at CCSI aims to do. But once an attacker has an active attack and he gets in there, and then they're looking to land and expand, right? They're in there, they're pivoting internally, they're seeing what they can do, they're moving around, then they try to exfiltrate data, and if they're good, they'll leave either something in there or they'll just come right back out, they'll clean their tracks, and you'll never know they were there, and they'll have the data and they're gone. That is an attacker timeline. It really depends on what the attackers were looking to do, what they were looking to accomplish. Some of them won't clean up tracks, so just take the data and leave, and figure it out. But if they're good at what they do and they don't want to be caught, they're doing this for a reason, and they're going to be in and out and as if they weren't even there. And that's the sign of a good attacker. During these times, we have to do the responder timeline. So when an attack happens, we need to determine, was the incident found, and determine how to respond to that incident. As they're doing their landing and expanding, you're sitting there as an attacker, and you're gathering evidence, and you're trying to detect and contain as they start, trying to exfiltrate data. There is that small little time frame of watching the attacker instead of automatically just killing everything. So if you're in there and you have an attacker that's in your network, there is the gathering evidence of pulling the telemetry around these attacks so that you understand more for your benefit of how this actually occurred and what they're actually after. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes you need to just root things out and stop them. But if you're able to gain that additional evidence, it gets a better understanding, which we'll get to next on the diamond model, of why you were attacked initially to begin with. So that's huge. Was this just a drive-by, like we said before, or were you targeted by a nation state? What is actually happening? So the post-mortem afterwards and the recovery, you're learning from that incident. So as you've contained and eradicated afterwards, or going through the incident response time frame, you have it there, you push it out, you're good, right? So you want to learn from these incidents, because if you don't learn from them and you just kind of like, shake your hands off, okay, they're out, let's keep going on our day, you were literally asking for it again, because one, these might be persistent attackers that you just kicked out, and they're just going to find it on the way in. So if you understand the data they're after, if you understand why they're after you, if you can, that's huge. That's huge for you. And that is why we get a little bit more into the diamond model. So the diamond model is built off the Intel community, which is great. It was recently released a few years back. I want to say 2015-ish, maybe a little later. But it uses relationships based off of these four components we have here: adversaries, capabilities, infrastructure, and victims. It's the who, what, where, and why of an incident. So once you can apply a label to one of these four, you get a better understanding. You're no longer flying off the seat of your pants, and you can take these and you can apply them towards the kill chain. Actually, not just the kill chain itself, but every phase, every step of the kill chain can have the diamond model, these four, spoken, right? So you have the 7 steps. Underneath the 7 steps, you can put a little diamond, and you can put these 4 here, and you can do this loop. Who is the adversary? What are they capable of? What infrastructure are they using or do they have? And who is the victim here? Once you determine it's you, then you get inside. Who is the victim at this stage? What business unit is affected? What are they going after? And you're really focusing and prioritizing, because if you don't focus and prioritize, you're really going to be all over the place. You're going to be running around like a chicken with his head cut off, and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just playing whack-a-mole. And that's what we call it. No one should be playing whack-a-mole during a breach. You should have the tactics, techniques, procedures. You should have your kill chain, your time frame, and then you should have your diamond model that's tying those below that, so that you have a better understanding, because you have to make sure that you know them. They're going to slip up at one point, and you're going to nail them. And then you have to be able to understand how to eradicate afterwards. But this really demonstrates the diamond model, the uses of certain capabilities and techniques over infrastructure with the attack that's currently going on. So you're really just sitting there and you're kind of applying everything. You're seeing things from a much broader scope, and you're kind of also making assumptions, because if you assume these certain things, if they have these capabilities and they have certain infrastructure, or you have certain infrastructure, you can kind of guess the next steps. If you can guess the next steps, you know where they are in the kill chain, and if you know where they are in the kill chain, you can use those tactics and techniques. So you see how these things all kind of interplay with each other. And this is a quote actually from the diamond model itself. this is it here. This is where it was leaked. Not leaked. Excuse me. This is where it was posted from the military. So it's on there. It's public. It's a great read. It's very interesting. But there's a quote in there that says, "For every intrusion event, there exists an adversary taking a step towards an intended goal by using a capability over infrastructure against a victim to produce a result." So what they're saying is they have intentions. Every time you see an event pop up within your systems, is them taking one step closer to what their intentions are. If you can understand that and you understand the capabilities they have based off of this model, based off of the kill chain and MITRE, you are able to, as a victim, produce a better result because you kind of know where they're going. You can kind of see it. And if you have that control, it just works. So this is what the kill chain is commonly seen as. This is what the dynamo model is commonly seen as. When we speak of the kill chain, we see these little image underneath those phases. So as an example, you have an adversary, you have their capabilities or their TTPs, you have victims, and you have infrastructure. Those are the four relationships we just spoke to. How they kind of interrelate towards each other. So we're going to give a little bit of an example on how there was one in the past. So if anybody is familiar with sandworm, sandworm was a massive, massive issue, still is today. So from an adversary standpoint, we'll kind of guess that, right? So what we're going to do is, sandworm was, over the past couple of years, was a group that was going after Ukrainian energy sector. So it was going after the Ukrainian energy sector. What they were doing at that point was they were using their capabilities in the TTPs, is they had PowerPoints with 0 days in it, never before seen. They launched it. They had the messaging in there was all either pro-Ukrainian or negative against Ukrainian. So it got people to click on these things, and by opening up the PowerPoint, it was able to drop down malware 0 day wise. They used something called, from the exploit perspective, so you have capabilities towards victims. Their tactics, techniques, and procedures and capabilities were something called Black Energy. It was a malware that was created that was a rootkit that searched out and put DLLs to control ICS equipment. So it was able to control their electrical grid. So now we're getting back to who the victim was, which was the Ukrainian energy sector. The infrastructure was their ICS equipment, which was heavily on the electric grid, and they went out to multiple ones, not just one, it was all of them. All the victims there had that particular adversary capability of dropping these payloads, and it was the same one, it was the same DLLs, and they searched there. So we're starting to get a better view of what's happening now, right? So we see the capabilities of this malware being used that was directed towards ICS equipment, that was directed towards the victims, and exploited these victims in the same way via these rootkits, via the delivery of PowerPoints, and then it connected to their infrastructure. And they were all Ukrainians, right? So they went from the Ukrainian energy sector, the infrastructure that was being attacked at one point and sought out for. So the malware would go into the machines, and then it would search out for this equipment. It would get there, and then what was happening was the adversary was then turning off the grid and testing and turning it off and testing and turning it off. So they were doing a staging of their capabilities. This is what's going on. Now, when you get back to it, right, this is going clockwise. You're seeing the capabilities, you're seeing the victim, you're seeing the infrastructure, and then once you see what's going on, what the exploits were, how it's in there, now you get to start trying to get a better understanding of what was actually occurring and who was the adversary, and then you start breaching out into certain areas. Was it Germany? Because a lot of these systems were developed in Germany. No, that wasn't it, because they have no reason to do so. And then you get down to it, and a lot of the things that were developed were based off of Russia. And Sandworm was the group they also called Voodoo Bear. I'm not sure who makes these names, but they're awesome. But the adversary based off of that is heavily attributed towards Russians staging an attack to test out new techniques against the Ukraine, based off of the way that the Russians and the Ukrainians have worked, based off the geopolitical kind of landscape that was there currently, and the way the leadership was there, and how Russia had recently invaded certain areas. That's a whole political thing, but you can start getting towards the more who actually did this, and then based off of that, you can get a better understanding of, who was the one that was actually the adversary of this. So with that being said, that's the diamond model that can kind of quickly go through things. At CCSI, we do similar things. We're SOC 2 Type 2. All the guys that we have, all our analysts, they're all SANS trained. We have the tools that we use internally. Those tools are all utilized. They have, MITRE capability in them. They're built into them so that we can kind of get a better understanding of where those tactics are, how we defend against them. We allow and we try to assist our customers to have more of a defensive posture to build that up. But at the same time, we want to do this so that we can close the gaps and close the dwell time. That is what we build our services for. That is what our SOC does every single day. That's kind of what they're doing. It really helps with the maturity of these organizations because we can go out there and really show them these are areas that you're weak in. These are areas that you're strong in. Let's focus more on the weak side of things and let's build some type of awareness around that. And that comes a lot of times with incident response playbooks, understanding your compliance and your governance, getting a better way of doing, tabletops. Tabletops are huge for this, absolutely huge. If we want to do a tabletop on you were actually breached, how would you use this tactic? And we would go through all this. Okay, the attacker is now having their initial access phase, and now you're in more of the recon phase afterwards. And what are you going to do next? And how would you defend against these techniques? And now the attacker is more in the exploitation phase in the kill chain. What would you do there? How would you determine what capabilities they have? Like these are things we'll kind of tie in to the incident response playbooks and as well as our tabletops. But what we want to just kind of leave everybody with here is, everyone's been through all these with us here. We have these services in there. It's what we do day in and day out. And, it's kind of some of the secret sauce that we use in behind the scenes. Not so secret. This is very public stuff, but it's certain things that we do here that we apply in that manner. So that being said, I have no other questions. I want to thank everybody for kind of coming out and taking these 3 seminars with us over the past, I would say, 4 weeks or so, 5 weeks. It's been awesome. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a ring, call us, send us an email, and just have a great day, guys. See ya.